Hello, English learners. Welcome back to the Level Up English podcast, the best place to come to practice the English language, learn about the British accent and culture with me, your host, Michael Lavers. I hope you're having a fantastic week, and I hope this episode makes it a little bit better because we're talking with a guest today, and our guest is Jesus. Jesus is originally from Colombia, but has been living in the USA for many years now. And, in my own opinion, I think you may not realize that he is not a native English speaker because he's worked on his English to such a high level that he sounds pretty much indistinguishable from a native speaker. So we do talk a little bit about that today and what it means to be fluent. And if you want to also find out some tricks or some advice that Jesus has about getting to that level, then stick around to find out. And this was one of those episodes where I had a lot of questions I wanted to ask, and we basically got to none of them. We got sidetracked, we got distracted because other things came up. And I think that's great. I think that's a sign of a good conversation when you're not able to get to the questions you wanted to ask. So hopefully you'll agree in this episode. So basically, we talk a lot today about accent and fluency and learning English, all of these kind of things. Jesus is an American accent specialist. So if you're interested in just generally improving your accent or pronunciation, or particularly the American accent, then this could be a good episode for you as well. But even if you prefer the British accent a bit like mine, then I think this will be very useful for you to listen to. We speak about it more at the end, but you can find Jesus on Cambly, on teaching platforms, also on his YouTube channel called The American Accent Playbook. And I'll put all these links down below for you to find as well. If you do struggle with that mixture of American and British accent, as always, transcripts are available for this episode and every other episode. They take a lot of time to prepare, but I think it's worth it for the members. So if you want to support the podcast and make your learning a little bit easier, you can sign up to Level Up English members and get these transcripts. And how it works is, as I'm talking, it will highlight the words that I'm using. It's also really helpful because if you want to remember, if you want to go back and you want to find a phrase or word that I said, you can very easily just click the search button and search for any word in the entire conversation. It's really easy to find previous topics as well. But anyway, if that is useful for you or not, it's there, it's ready, it's available. But otherwise, let's get into our conversation with Jesus. I really hope you enjoy this one. Jesus, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Michael. Thank you so much for having me here.
It's my pleasure. Yeah, it's really nice to chat with you. I was really excited to see that you reached out. It was kind of difficult trying to find a time because we're on the other side of the world from each other, but luckily we did in the end.
Yes, it took some patience, a little bit of a back and forth. But yes, we made it work even despite the 11-hour difference.
Yeah, it's quite tough. Maybe you could give us a quick introduction as to who you are, your background, and what you do online these days.
Yes, so let me give you the brief version of the story. So my name is Jesús Flórez. I'm 35 years old, and I'm an English teacher. My education was to be an English as a second language teacher back in my home country of Colombia. I've been now living in the United States for almost 10 years. I don't do teaching as my full-time occupation or job at the moment. I would like that to be the case, but I have been doing online teaching for about 2.5 years, and very recently, within the last year or so, I got into accent and pronunciation training.
Excellent. Yes. So, I mean, maybe people can tell by the way you speak, but presumably you focus on American accent training, right?
Absolutely, yes. No doubt. I mean, it's really obvious.
It is for me anyway, but I know for some people it's harder to pick up on accent. But maybe the answer is quite simple, but I'm always curious when non-native English speakers get into English teaching. Like, did you ever have a debate with yourself between? So I presume Spanish is your native language, right? Like,
Sure, it
yeah.
is.
Did you ever have a debate like, should I teach English or Spanish, or were you just more passionate about English?
Oh no, I mean certainly for me, the choice was very clear right from the get-go. I never had any interest in teaching my own language, as a foreign or additional language. It was always English for me. Um, this can actually get into a little bit of, let's say, the history of my language learning journey. What first got me interested, and if you'd like, I can try to get into that.
Yep, yeah, yeah. By all means, yeah. I'm kind of curious because, of course, you speak English very fluently. Um, I think most people wouldn't really have much idea that you're not from an English speaking country originally. So I'd be interested to hear how you got to that level and a bit about your journey as well.
Sure. Yes. That's such a nice compliment, when that happens, or an amazing feeling when you are in that position that people are not really sure. People hesitate to say, where you might be from
Hmm.
as opposed to where you're really from. I'll get into that some more later, but the very short version or compressed version of the story is that I had a very early exposure to the English language. I'm going to say ages 6, 7, and 8. There was a very nice, I think it was a nice movie from the 90s called Independence Day. Came out in 1996. At one point, I believe it made it into this top 100 sci fi films of all time. I must have watched that movie hundreds of times by the time I became a teenager. And let's just say that it was one of those first experiences that got me curious about this language. It sounded cool. I wanted to imitate the way that some of these actors were speaking. And so let's say that that started there. Now, there's another point in time that is formative in my learning experience, and that happens when I was 14 years old. I went through a regular school system, like most people do, and it has or had a foreign language component. For most Latin American countries, that's English. What I learned working or going through the system wasn't really that great or memorable. And I believe that that experience is very relatable if you talk to other people around the world. But when I was 14, I had the chance to attend an independent language school, which was in addition to my regular schooling. The the long and short of it is that my mom convinced me to try this out. This is actually very interesting. This was back when you had or still had people selling products door to door. You
Hmm.
might have seen something like that in your lifetime. But basically, there was this person that came into our living room and pitched the course. And my mom was convinced. I went along with it at her insistence, but let's say that I warmed up to the idea. When I first had my when I had my first introduction to the place, I remember that the teachers were excellent. Some of them had lived in the U.S. back in the 90s. They were all very fluent, and they did teach me a lot of stuff back then. And so that, let's say, that builds or completes, let's say, a foundation, a very solid foundation that then I continue to build upon. And one last point about this is that my high school English as a second language teacher was also decisive or played a decisive role in this history for me. She was very much like the teachers from this independent school. She was tough. She never used Spanish in class. She challenged us to use English. So that made her, special, unique compared to the other teachers, that I had. during those days. And so that again was another formative experience. And she basically is the reason why I decided to pursue a teaching degree of my own.
That's amazing. So maybe you could hopefully also inspire people in the future the same way that she had that effect on you, right?
I hope so, yes. It's kind of like, it goes, I'm trying to think of a good analogy here for this. It's kind of like a reverb effect. It
Like an
starts
echo.
with exactly, yeah. And so, um, like a ripple effect. I think that's what I was trying to think of there. And so she starts or plants that seed, you know, in my mind, to pursue something similar. And then perhaps, as I share my story more and more, others might basically, end up, going down the same path. So, yes, presumably somebody out there, has been inspired. Let's hope.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to online content creating and stuff like that, that's always quite exciting to me. Thinking about, I guess we could also call it like a butterfly effect. How you might do one little action or one little video, and you never know who it's going to affect and the changes that might come from that down the line. It might be small, but it might also be big. It's kind of exciting to think about. And yeah, of course, teaching even in a classroom is similar in the same way. But
Yes.
yeah, I like your story, and it's a few things that I can relate to. Like, also didn't like languages at school at all, and in fact, that's what kind of inspired me to teach online. Is because I hated learning like French and Spanish in schools. It was really boring. Um, and another thing that stood out to me was the beginning of my Japanese learning journey. Also started with like one specific movie as well. So it's kind of funny how like one movie can inspire us to do all this thing. Yeah, Independence Day is a great movie as well. But yeah, you don't sound like Will Smith too much, so you haven't copied
No,
it totally.
I didn't pick that up very well. No, Will, his acting was superb, in that movie, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. That was like peak Will Smith days, I'd say. Um,
Yes, the 90s, that was his decade.
yeah, absolutely. Uh, I'm kind of curious to ask you what you think about the word fluency. Maybe you've seen this from students, but I get a question a lot like, how can I become fluent? Or at what point do I know that I'm fluent? And a lot of focus on this word fluency, or the F word, I hear people call it sometimes.
Yeah,
But
somebody was very clever, in coming up with that.
mm,
It is because, and I get it because I've actually wondered about this myself, and I've also asked this question of other teachers out there. Let me tell you this. Um, I am active. I'm actually a tutor on Cambly. I've been there for 2.5 years. I used it as, let's say, well, I was a user of it back in 2020. I tried it out for a few months. And I actually asked this question of a handful of tutors. There was one answer that was memorable because I had never really thought about it this way. Now, I personally do like how simple his definition was, and I guess how, let's say, relevant, it still is. His definition basically was like this. To him, fluency means that you are unmistakable to a native speaker.
mm,
I like it. It's very punchy, if you ask me, and it's easy to remember as well. And one of the reasons why that sticks with me is because one thing that I have done is that about a year or so ago, I was interested in seeing what some academic research has to say on the topic of fluency. There's actually a lot written out there. And so you can find a wealth of research papers, white papers out there. There is uh, one that is from Duolingo. As you know, they develop now their English test, and they have their research team. They have their publications online. You can read the papers if you're interested. They're, obviously they're very technical and very dry, and so they're not, fun reads. But you do find some very interesting things. They have a white paper on how they assess speaking. You know, in their own, particular or peculiar way. Because as you know, the test is a 100% online, as in, like, there is no paper version of that test. And there is a line there that was very interesting, and I wanted just to quote this here briefly. Um, According to them, fluency features can further be categorized into uh, they come up with interesting terms. They don't really define them, unfortunately. They just move on to something else. But they talk about your speed fluency, your breakdown fluency, and your repair fluency, which is really interesting stuff. I would love to see one day another paper that breaks that down some more. I would love to see what they have to say about it. But then also, there's another, let's say, a little bit of more academically oriented point here, and that is the band descriptors, or sorry, not the band descriptors, but the assessment criteria for the IELTS exam, because they do have, and these are publicly available now, a definition of fluency out there, which I guess is quite, conventional these days, but
Mhm.
I still like, uh, to refer back to it sometimes. They define it as the ability to talk with normal levels of continuity, rate, and effort, and linking ideas and language together to form coherent, connected speech. It's actually quite, there's a lot packed in there. But that definition has become kind of commonplace these days. But the reason why I go to these sources is because a lot of the time, many of the definitions that I've seen out there of fluency are heavily anecdotal. And there isn't that much, let's say, of a more rigorous, defining of terms. And it is hard to measure fluency. How do you know that you're there? And you were asking about how do you know when you are fluent? This is actually a question that I answered recently, last week, on another interview that I sat down for. And the answer that I gave, and I can kind of, like, repackage that answer here, is that there isn't really one specific point in time that I can, look to and say, oh, yeah, that's when I became fluent. It's more about a convergence of small realizations. Let me give you some examples in my own story. So I graduate high school at 16. That's very common in some countries where you don't have, let's say, grade 12. I know you use a different terminology in the UK for your, I don't know, your secondary education. But basically, the equivalent of high school in Colombia stops at grade 11,
Mm.
which is usually around the ages of 16 or 17. And so when I graduate high school, after I graduate high school, I continue learning. I do it basically all by myself. I taught myself everything I know after I leave or graduate school. And around 18 is when I got interested in acquiring an American accent, pronunciation training. That is meaning, or I mean personally, as in myself wanting to train a new accent. Um, One moment that, let's say, helps to make it clear that I had crossed a threshold was that when I was 19, I had the chance to attend an international education fair. I don't know how common these things are these days, but way back then, there was this company, an American company, called Linden Tours. I think that was their name. And they would travel from country to country, city to city. And they spent one day in my home city. And I went to the event. They had rented basically a big conference room, in a hotel. And they set up these, I guess you could call them stands or booths. And I went to every single one of them, as far as I remember. And I talked to every single rep that was manning these things. And every single one of them understood me perfectly.
Hmm.
Now, that was an incredible moment of accomplishment or feeling of accomplishment, and also confirmation that all the training that I was doing or had been doing was legit. Because you see, one thing that is different in my own experience acquiring an accent is that I did it all by myself. I wish I had had a mentor or a tutor. I mean, looking back, I certainly wish that that had been the case. And I would strongly recommend now that those contemplating something similar find someone to, to guide them, kind of like to keep you accountable.
Hmm.
It can save you time, to have a more, let's say, structured plan. You're not kind of like shooting in the dark. That takes longer, but you can still do it that way. And so that was a big moment for me after that happened. Because you see, I had already had the chance to interact with native speakers. But this one was different because um, this was let's just say that this was a brand new setting in the sense that I had never had in one space so many native speakers present. And so that was intimidating too. I mean, it certainly made me feel a little bit uneasy at first. But right after I had the first conversation, everything else just basically fell into place.
That's amazing. Yeah, lots going through my mind with that, but I think your definition of fluency I found quite interesting because yeah, the one that you mentioned right at the beginning, like to me, I would say like what I guess fluency is like a very broad term, but when I think of someone who's fluent, I don't necessarily think of accent being a big part of it. Like if someone can speak like fluently, they can express themselves for naturally, correct grammar, they can pronounce things so that you can understand them clearly, but they might have like quite a strong Spanish accent. Like it's not like I could maybe guess they're from a Spanish speaking country, even though they're speaking English fluently. But would you say that you feel accent is more important in fluency, or would you still consider that fluent as well?
I would still consider a person fitting that description fluent. I would. My own stance has shifted because I did used to um, subscribe to the idea that pronunciation, accent. I mean, it's kind of hard to sometimes, clearly distinguish
Yeah.
the two. There's a lot of conflating that is happening there. At least academically speaking, there is um, a clearer difference. I can maybe get into that later. But let's just say that I've softened the opinion or the position that I, used to hold, in that regard. Because this was interesting at the time. There was, I don't know if this is an actual study or a story that was publicized or reported on, but back in 2010, 11, around that time, there was something that was, again, either being reported or, written about of teaching assistants in American universities um, not being taken seriously by the students because of a for lack of a better term, let's call it a thick foreign accent. Now, again, uh, I don't really ascribe too much weight to this anymore. There's been a lot of shifting in the let's say mm, the mindset these days. But at the time, that let's say helped form the opinion that I used to hold that perhaps there is something to the perception of speech and you know the presence of an accent that is unfamiliar or let's say non-standard to a person's ears. Some things have happened after that, again, made me change my opinion. One of those was actually very interesting. I'm sure you know what the CEFR is.
Mm. The
So,
European framework.
yeah, I've never read the document. Full disclosure. This came out way back in 2001, but it had a major revision in 2020. Some of the language that was used in the can-do descriptors or statements actually moved away from the native speaker as a benchmark to something interesting. The current phraseology is competent speaker.
Mm.
That was
Interesting.
that was a major shift, in the academic or in academia to go from the traditional, let's say, standard of a native speaker to a competent speaker. That was major. That actually got me thinking, at the time. And then something else had happened, and this is actually way more anecdotal. You know what the IELTS exam is. Um, Before I decided to go into the accent training or go down the accent training route, I had been considering uh, something related to test preparation, as in teaching people to or help them prepare to take these tests, like IELTS, for instance, or TOEFL. There is a plethora of podcasts out there doing this, probably in the thousands at this point, I would dare to say. And there was one that, in a way, kind of like went against my expectations, or let's say my assumptions. I don't think I am, let's say, too off the mark in considering or, being of the opinion that examiners are usually native speakers. But
Mhm.
that's not the case. In fact, what I came across was a podcast hosted by an examiner or former examiner whose foreign accent was quite noticeable.
Mm.
As in, you can very easily tell he was extremely fluent, but the accent gave it away. Like you can see it from a mile away. And that also, contributes, to that shifting of my mindset, no, in my opinion. I'm doing the accent training very informally right now. I, it's kind of hard to, uh, put this in more concrete terms. But I do want to have something of my own where I am primarily an accent pronunciation coach. And let's say, to a lesser extent, a more traditional ESL teacher, because that was the basically the bulk of my education. You know, think of, you know, your teacher going let's say, helping you to learn the language. Obviously, that's extremely broad, but you can always break it down in the four traditional, sub skills, you know, reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So I can still do that, not as confidently, if I may say. I feel much more in my element when it's pronunciation or accent training, but I can still do, something that is, let's say, more of the mainstream. Like I like to, when I get the chance, and I've done this with some of my Cambly students, to help them fix some very pesky grammar mistakes, the kind that are really basic, like subject verb agreement, verbs in the past tense, and things like that. I mean, you would not believe how typical or common it is to come across a person who, for all intents and purposes, speaks a language quite well, but still makes some very basic, extremely basic grammar mistakes, which, if I'm going to be honest, they grate on your ears. That happens to me. When I hear that.
Hmm.
And
Especially
so,
as a teacher, yeah.
s- and sometimes, I just basically just tell them, straight up, look, let's fix this once and for all. You should not be making these mistakes anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, you were talking about native speakers and learners, and I think native speakers do the same. Where I think partly they just don't care because they're not, say, talking about English, they're not learning English really. So they might make some common grammar mistakes, like a lot of people might say, "I would of liked to go" instead of "would have." Like, I would have liked to go. That's very common, at
Yes.
least in the UK. And I think a lot of native speakers don't realize they're making that mistake. But I think as long as their point is getting expressed, then it doesn't really matter. And yeah, a lot of learners, they get these mistakes cemented because it's understandable. They never get corrected. It might be quite small, but
Yes.
maybe a little bit annoying as a teacher to hear again and again.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
actually, if I can just speak to that real quick, you can have, obviously, you can have a range of opinions, on something like this. How, let's say, strict you want to be about it. Um, I don't know exactly where I fall on the spectrum, but there are some things that I hear quite regularly that I just simply find unbearable. For instance, this is one that I'm sure you've heard, and that is people using the simple past form of irregular verbs when they should be using the past participle.
Like
That
cutted.
is absolutely insane for me.
Can you give an example? So I said cutted, but do you not mean that? You mean that I have swam instead of swum. Is that what you mean?
Exactly. Or
Mm.
I'm going to use a real life example. I work, my main job, as in my daytime job, is in an office where I live. I work for the local government, and so I work in the courthouse. I have basically what you can describe as a an office job, and I have a coworker. And one question, that she sent recently, was, "Have you ate yet?" Look, no, obviously, I say this, with no ill intent, but that to me is just insane. And especially considering that mistake is basically, um, as you said, being cemented and becoming extremely commonplace to the point that it is likely that at least in some situations, it will not be, you know, it won't even register in some people's minds. That's a big one. Another one is to, I'm sure you use this in the UK as well, to be written up. Like when you work, you get written up. You get basically like
punished? Like,
It's like, yeah, yeah. But then I've already heard many times, so and so got wrote up.
yeah, to me that sounds more kind of casual, like slang kind of style, like in the same way you might say like ain't or something like that. Like
In a
I
in a
ain't done
way,
nothing,
in a
like kind
way,
of similar style to me, like wrong grammar, but more like street grammar. I don't know how I'd call it, but
has that vibe
yeah,
to it. Yes, and so things like that um, are yeah. I mean, to your point of mistakes being made or kind of like slipping under the radar. It's just that some of those are just too egregious for me, if I may speak, honestly.
yeah. It's funny. I mean, I laughed when you said that first example because that's I think my mum's whole side of the family, they all do that. They're all native English speakers, but it might be like a regional thing where we're from in the UK. We're quite far from where the standard English, like textbook English, might come from. So that they all say like, "I haven't ate nothing today" or something like that, and it's very
Mm.
like what we could say is wrong grammar, but it's funny how native speakers will do that too. But maybe, yeah, I think if any learners are confused, I guess you'd agree. I always say you have to learn the rules first before you can break them. When you get really fluent, then if you want to, you can start being a bit playful. But a learner making this mistake sounds much different than a native speaker to me. It's kind of a unfair double standard, but if someone who's learning English makes this mistake, it sounds more obvious, which is a shame. But I guess you know what I
Yeah,
mean.
I know exactly what you mean because I've heard the same comment made by other teachers because it seems like, again, there is some kind of a double standard at play. Native speakers seem to get a pass, when they come up with something like that. But then we're not as forgiving when it comes to learners of English. I don't know. It's an interesting thing that's happening. Probably that's more of a social linguistics phenomenon, in my opinion. But when you are a teacher and when you are a second language speaker of English, let's just say that you are more sensitive. I'm speaking only for myself here right now, but I'm sure that this experience is common out there. You are more likely to pick up on these things. You Let's say that your ears are more fine-tuned and it's like your spidey senses go off.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Something that you can train, but also it does happen naturally as well. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I wasn't really expecting to talk this long about fluency and accents, but it's really interesting. So maybe we can keep it going. And I think one question a lot of listeners will be like dying for me to ask is, how did you train your own accent? Like, I'm curious personally whether it was very conscious to get your American accent, or did it just kind of come along for the ride, so to speak? Like it just happened while you were learning.
No, it certainly didn't happen that way. No, this is a very conscious and calculated effort on my part. There were a number of reasons why, but I've always basically um, I've always basically proffered two reasons why I wanted to do something like this. One reason was that in my mind, when I was 17, 18, I really wanted to be taken seriously when I spoke English. Now, to me at the time, that basically meant a deep dive into pronunciation training. And basically, I'm using the terms kind of interchangeably. For all intents and purposes, you can think of them interchangeably. There are differences, but just for the sake of what I'm trying to get across here, think of pronunciation as basically the same as an accent. So that was one thing. The second reason is that I wanted to give myself an edge over other teachers or other learners. And so I thought at the time that getting as close as possible to a native-like model or idea was the way to do that, was the way to make myself more competitive, over others. That's as far as the reasons are concerned. How I got to it is not really groundbreaking, um, but I will say this. There was, as you can expect, a great deal of listening and paying very close attention to the way that people spoke. That is key. One of the things that I try to use as, let's say, uh, let's say part of my elevator pitch for accent training is that when you train your pronunciation or accent, you dramatically improve your listening comprehension. I firmly believe in that connection. You improve one, and the other, in a way, kind of follows almost inevitably. And so there's that benefit. So I did a lot of listening. I, as you can, expect, I try to consume as much content in English as I could, and particularly, I uh, devoured hours of anime dubbed in English.
Interesting.
I was really into it, back then. I did that for about maybe four or 5 years, something like that.
I like that. You're
The
combining your interest with what you want to do, which is a good key thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's basically conventional wisdom at this point.
Mm.
Because that sustains your motivation.
Yeah.
It keeps it going. I guess one thing that I can say about listening to anime dubbed in English is that it provided me with a very good model to try to imitate. Because one of the things that we don't really think about a lot is that when you are listening to the dubbing of an animated show, you are listening to voice actors who are obviously professionally trained for these things, and they are delivering their lines in a controlled environment. There's really very little, let's say, ambient noise, that can make the listening comprehension more difficult,
Mm.
which is why, at least initially, I didn't get too much into, let's say, live action things like series and movies. That comes later. But the anime for me plays a pivotal role in my, let's say, general English level, but primarily when it came to the accent training. Because another thing was that I was listening for every single detail that I was learning through my books, and I basically confirmed everything, that I learned. And that's another point in my, let's say, mm, the way that I made this happen. Everything that I learned, I have heard it confirmed from a native speaker in one way or another, which was either through watching these shows or interacting with native speakers face to face. And one great advantage that I had, great blessing, was that I used to live in a city where we had lots of Peace Corps volunteers. I'm sure you know what Peace Corps is.
I'm vaguely familiar, but I'm not totally clear. But it's like, is it a volunteer group or something like that?
Yes, they're actually part of the U.S. Department of State.
Hmm.
The idea is that you try to foster good relations between the U.S. and other countries by sending volunteers overseas to do all kinds of things. In Colombia at the time, they were only there for their English for Livelihoods program, which basically was teaching English. There was more to it, but you can basically boil it down to teaching. And so I had the chance to meet lots of these people. One of them started a conversation club, interestingly. Initially, he conceived of the idea as a language exchange, but that fizzled out extremely quickly. It became an English only event. And I played a very active role in making that happen. Like I used to manage for a little while the Facebook group that we had. There's a whole lot of other things happening there, but I also, and this speaks, let's say, more to another like piece of conventional wisdom. We are asking people to take risks and put themselves in situations where there's more pressure to, let's say, perform. And so one thing I did is that I use a lot of these conversation club sessions as testing grounds for what I was learning in my accent training, just to see if they could get it. And so that's the other way in which I confirmed that everything that I had been learning was the real deal.
Fantastic. Yeah. So,
So
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I just wanted to say that again, there isn't really nothing that's groundbreaking. I'm not going to
Uh-huh.
give you like a silver bullet here. However, what I do want to emphasize is that I had the great benefit of having so much access to in person, face to face interactions with native speakers. And that was obviously, I mean, as you can imagine or expect, tremendously helpful in an overall fluency development, but also accent acquisition.
I think that matches what I understand as well. I'm not an expert in the area of accent or even pronunciation, really. But I've always said to students they should be quite cautious, in my opinion, when trying to force an accent. Because I've heard, some learners before who they might have like a British accent. They might sound like very kind of what we call like Queen's English, like very British, we could say. Uh, but yet they're making very basic grammar mistakes and all these uh, quite low intermediate English learner mistakes. And I think to me that sounds quite strange, where the accent is at a higher level than the general English level. But it sounds like for you there was a lot of practice, listening and speaking as well. So I guess you were learning gradually and not. It doesn't sound like you were trying to force it, like only focus on accent and forget about everything else. So I think there
No, not really.
has to be some balance
Let's.
there, right?
I think so too. I always looked at it as an integrated, let's say, whole. It wasn't just about the accent training because at the same time, I also wanted to basically improve my English level.
Hmm.
And that's extremely vague. I realize that, but all of these things really are connected with one another. The speaking of fluency or ability, in my mind, is very closely connected with your vocabulary knowledge, which is something else that I was doing with these anime shows, and to a very different degree or extent with the Peace Corps volunteers. But I was always very attentive to new words and expressions that would pop up in conversation, and I would take note of those things. This is another um, conventional piece of wisdom these days that you have a record of your of the vocabulary that you're trying to learn, use, recycle. I'll say this: I wish that back then I had known about this whole idea of space repetition.
Hmm.
It seems very interesting and quite effective. I've never done it. I did it, let's say, more of the old school way. Like I would actually write down things on paper. I'm that ancient. Um, but I collected a great deal of what I thought back then was amazing vocabulary. So those two things were definitely they were being developed, you know, side by side, almost like on parallel tracks there's the pronunciation on the one side, but then there's also, a more general knowledge of the language, and basically just acquiring more to, to a point, more sophisticated vocabulary, and basically, lots of language that is quite appropriate for everyday conversations, like tons, and I mean loads of phrasal verbs, for instance.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, maybe just to quickly explain spaced repetition, if people don't know, this is, I guess, for example, like when you're studying flashcards, lots of software and apps these days, they might have spaced repetition software or whatever, spaced repetition included, where it repeats words based on how well you know them or remember them. But yeah, I mean, I love that. I do it every day, and it's a really big help to me just to remember even more obscure, difficult words. But I think it's kind of based on the natural way we learn languages, which is, as you said, if you're doing lots of listening or reading, we're naturally getting spaced repetition because if someone's listening to my podcast every week, they might learn a new word, like maybe spaced repetition. They might learn that phrase, for example, and then just as they're forgetting, they might hear it again next week in next week's episode. And that's kind of a natural way. Maybe it's not going to be as efficient because there's no algorithm to help you, but
Yeah.
obviously it worked for you, so it's not, but both ways could go well.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that. There's there really is, and it just sounds so trite these days, but there really isn't a one size fits all approach. When it comes to these things. Again, I think that spaced repetition might have been beneficial to me back then if I had known about it. Um, it's just an intuition that I have, that I think that this, if I'd known about this, or if this had existed back then, let's say the way that it is or it exists now, I think I would have been able to benefit from it. I don't know how exactly, but I just have that feeling that that could have been another tool, in my toolkit, to help me to advance, just move forward, in the overall fluency journey, language learning journey.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that's a good point. No, it's not one size fits all. Everyone's different, and I think that's why there's so much language learning content online, in books, everywhere, because everyone's different, and everyone needs a kind of a different style, different approach. There may be some rules that apply across the board to everyone, but no one style is correct. I mean, if it were, then I could just make one episode and say, this is how you learn English, and then I'd be done. I don't have to keep going, but it's not that simple, maybe for better or worse.
There's a whole lot more going on there for sure.
It's interesting. Well, I definitely didn't expect to talk this long about fluency and accent, but I really enjoyed it. So I've let it go, and there's a lot that I wanted to ask you that I haven't had time. So maybe that will be for a future conversation. Who knows? But
sure, we can. Yeah, we can put it in the back burner. Yeah.
Yeah. What can we say? Put a pin in that and keep it.
Yeah,
for later.
exactly. Yeah, we don't say that in American English. But by the way,
you don't say that.
No, I mean, at least I don't think so. I don't.
Do you have
say
an
that.
equivalent?
I probably just say that we can circle back to it another time.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so I mean, just to explain to everyone, this idiom, to put a pin in something, is like, I guess you can imagine you've got like a notice board. I think this is where it comes from. This is what I imagine anyway. And you've got like a piece of paper with a note. You put a pin in it, and it kind of keeps it there for later. That may not be the origin, but that's what I think of. It's just like, we'll come back to that later. But I think you wouldn't say pin. Would you say like thumbtack or something in American English?
Yes, I was thinking of that word, but I don't think we have something that at least matches the form of that expression. I would just simply try to paraphrase and just say that, well, we'll visit, we'll touch on that later.
But interestingly, did you understand me because you heard before that it was a British? Did you learn that idiom before, or did you just learn?
I did.
Okay, it wasn't
No,
just
I
based
did.
on context.
I didn't know that from before. Obviously, the context in this case makes it really
Yeah.
easy to understand. One thing that I want to just mention briefly here is
Yeah.
that obviously I chose American English as my default. Like the basic like the base form of this language for me is American through and through. However, I am familiar with, I'm gonna say, a modicum of British English. I like a lot of your expressions and some of the equivalent terms, that refer to everyday things, objects, situations. I'm sure you know. I mean, I'm sure you know a lot of those as well. But I like that. In fact, one thing that I would like to do, is I mean, this really is kind of like a hobby of mine to an extent. But I like to learn about equivalent expressions, idioms, words, even phrasal verbs. I did a video a few months ago now with another teacher, and we actually looked at obviously a lot of the differences, that are expected or that are already well known between the two forms of English. But one thing that is really interesting to explore is the different phrasal verbs that are not used, um,
Mm.
let's say, in both places. There are some interesting differences. So let me give you just one, because you see, this is one that I had never heard before until I did the research in preparation for this video. I don't know if you say this, but there is a phrasal verb to muck in, as in
Okay.
Muckin.
I don't think I know what that
We
means.
Well, it means to pitch in. At least
Okay.
that's what we are used to saying in American English, as in everyone, like collaborate or help out. That was really interesting. I had never heard that before. And maybe one more is that in here in the US, we say or we use the phrasal verb to hunker down.
Hmm.
You guys say something different, at least according to this. I mean, I used ChatGPT for this research, but Catherine confirmed this for me. Um, you batten down in the UK.
Again, I would say hunker down. That's interesting. I think this is one really fascinating thing when it comes to British and American English from the British point of view is a lot of idioms and phrases that we use that might be American, we actually don't know. I mean, the common ones we know, like, sneakers and, uh, sweater, that we know that those are American, but there's a lot of stuff that I would say that I don't realize is American because we hear it so much in movies, or we should say films, that it's just become so normal in everyday speech. And yeah, I guess if you
Yeah,
don't have many American friends, you don't pick up on that as well. So
yeah.
yeah, I guess I learned something new.
That cross pollination has always been, in my mind, rather skewed because there's always more of our content that you're consuming out there
Yeah,
than the opposite. There's not a whole lot of British media being consumed here in the US.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And yeah, definitely. I would say definitely it's trending. Like British English is becoming more American rather than the reverse. Right, America has a much bigger impact on the world these days.
That's an interesting way to put it. Yes, it is. I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
But I like those differences. And I don't know if you know, but this is actually a word. You can be bidialectal in a language.
Okay, having two dialects as a learner or even a native speaker.
Probably, let's say a user of the language. You can
Hmm.
be bidialectal. And so I would like to be more bidialectal.
Yeah, it's yeah. I think that it's interesting to talk about, but if anyone is listening and they're at a lower level, perhaps, then I don't think it's something to worry about too much because
No,
95% or even more they're the same language, right? It's just a few more advanced differences. But again,
yeah,
even if like you hadn't heard that phrase from before, put a pin in it. I think you could probably guess the meaning based on the context. So it's not like totally on what non what do I want to say? It's not totally hard to understand.
no, no, you can work out the meaning very easily.
Yeah.
Some expressions are quite obscure, as in it's too hard to work out the meaning, and they are almost kind of like indecipherable if you don't know the meaning, or if someone doesn't tell you what the meaning is. That one is those are called there's a name for those things. At least the one that I heard is those are proverb idioms. And
Mm,
those typically are much easier to work out the meaning of. It is much harder to work out the meaning of phrasal verbs if you have never seen them before.
yeah. I mean, I spoke about this before. There's different types, right? There's what we call idiomatic phrasal verbs and literal phrasal verbs. Literal might be like look up, like look, you're looking, it's up. It's kind of obvious what you mean, but if you're talking about the other meaning of look up, which means to research, it's a bit more idiomatic because although you're
Yeah,
looking, up is not a relevant word in terms of the
yeah.
meaning. So there's a
It
lot
is
to
not
learn.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's not at all obvious. But no, yeah, just to circle back real quick to your point. Yes, sometimes the differences are exaggerated. Uh, the core
For
of the
sure.
language remains the same, and so there's there's very little, in my mind, likelihood of a significant misunderstanding or breakdown in communication. Typically, that just doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think that's really important to say between the two. Well, I mean, there are many dialects of English, but the two ones that people often talk about, US and UK. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
And with good reason. I mean, if you think about it in terms of numbers, it's very clear.
yeah.
I mean, there is approximately something like 400 plus million native speakers of English in the world. About two-thirds are speakers of American English.
Hmm, yeah. I'm always aware that there might be some people living in Australia getting like, "What about me? Why don't you talk about me?" But yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
It's just if you look at the numbers, uh, you know, if it's based. I mean, if you want to keep it to like something very concrete,
Yeah.
like numbers, I mean, it's clear that that is one of the determining factors for these two forms, these two Englishes, to be the dominant ones.
We're simplifying it, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, I want to be aware of your time because I know it's quite late for you, so I've had that in the back of my head.
Yeah, that's
But
fine.
but
I
but I was
actually I get, well, I mean, what is it that some people say that when you get in a good conversation, it
in
gives
the
you
flow.
energy. Like
Yeah,
you,
you get energized.
yeah, there's something about it. Yeah, yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's almost like it revitalizes you in a way, gives you like a second wind.
Yeah, I get that too. I mean, I'm always in two minds. Like, I'm really enjoying the conversation, but then I'm like, oh, we can't record like a 5 hour podcast, and I'm
No,
thinking about the podcasting side as well. And yeah, it's difficult. I feel like I could make a whole episode just about being a podcaster one day. So maybe I don't know if that'd be interesting, but there's a lot. There's always a lot going on in my head that I tried to quiet it down, but
yeah.
yeah.
Well, think of it this way. You can probably think of it this way. If you ever put something like that out there, you might be paving the way for others to start their own things. Like I would
Hmm.
love personally to start a podcast myself. I just don't know where to go or where to even start.
Well, speaking of that, I think it could be a good time for you to mention what you do. Like, are there places that people can find you online, like YouTube and other places?
You can find me on YouTube. Uh, my channel is it's not doing too hot, let's say. I have been more active on Instagram. Michael will have the links in the description box. I haven't put out a reel in several weeks, but I did put out something weekly for about a month, which is the most productive I have been there, considering everything that I have to deal with in my own life. I'm just life is very busy for me. I mean, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I have four kids. So I'm extremely busy.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. And would you like me to put your Cambly link as?
Yeah, sure. I will say this though, just a bit of a caveat. I am taking a break from Cambly. I got burned out badly, and I just needed to take a step back. So you can share it, but I am not planning to come back or go back to Cambly for at least 6 months.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about revisiting that decision in September.
Okay. Well, the great thing about podcasts is they are kind of evergreen. So maybe people might be listening to this a year, several years in the future. They may be clicking on your pages and they might see you've got millions of followers, and who knows? Who knows what's going to happen in the future? So we can put all the links there, and the situation might change, right? You might be daily posting on Instagram when they have a look. Who knows?
Absolutely. That's a very good point. I like that way of thinking about it. So yeah, I think this is a good point to wrap it up. Let me see. Typically, the host asks for parting words or thoughts.
I
I
could do
guess
that.
I believe that you have devised, or let's say designed, this podcast with intermediate to advanced level learners in mind, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That kind of level.
I would just say to the audience that I appreciate you listening to my long-winded answers. But I hope that you take this as inspiration in your own language um, journey. You can do this. You can do what I have done if you are into the pronunciation or accent training. And yes, continue listening, continue practicing. In a way, learning another language is very much, and I really like this analogy of fitness, muscle training. It requires patience, dedication, and maintenance too. We don't think a lot about maintenance, but there is an aspect to it in language learning as well. And so that is what makes it, let's say, never ending. Like even to this day, there is maintenance that I have to do in my English, so that it doesn't wither away. So um, yeah, just keep pressing on. You can do this, and keep listening.
I love it. Yeah, very motivational. I think we'll leave it there. So thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed talking with you, and maybe we'll do it again. I'll let you get to bed now.
Sure, no problem. Thank you for having me, Michael.
Thank you. You have been listening to the Level Up English podcast. If you would like to leave a question to be answered on a future episode, then please go to levelupenglish.school/podcast. That's levelupenglish.school/podcast. And I'll answer your question on a future episode. Thanks for listening.